Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. Just have a couple videos I want to record tonight. I'm going to start off with, well, obviously this one, but this particular video I'm going to be doing a book review. I ended up DNFing a book. Didn't particularly want to. I was really looking forward to the book when I started Jane Austen in July, but it has not been as enjoyable of a read as I hoped it would be. And that book would be In the Pride of the Moment, which is, okay, so it's In the Pride of the Moment, Encounters in Jane Austen's World. I'm just moving my sticky notes. By John A. Duffinger. This was a book that was written in, I believe it was actually written in 89, but the copyright is 1990. So I want to say that the Library of Congress year is 1989, but the copyright on the book is 1990. So I was really looking forward to this book at the beginning of Jane Austen July, and I made it about, I got to page 46 before I eventually decided that I was not enjoying the process of reading this, and so I stopped. My problem with this book is the fact that the author seemed either like he was overly impressed with his own intelligence, or like he wanted to impress others with his own intelligence. I'll admit I wrote a rather snarky review for this on Goodreads because I was really frustrated with this book because I had really been anticipating reading it. I really was looking forward to the topic matter, which was discussing how the encounters, the conversations, etc., in Jane Austen's work, how they reveal theme, how the character development occurs and all the action occurs in these seemingly small interactions. So that was a topic that really interested me. Unfortunately, the way that the author chose to go about presenting his, I guess, thesis, for lack of a better term, was just very pretentious. When he could have been more clear using simpler language, he instead chose to use the most, well, pretentious is the best word I can use. He used the most pretentious language that he could. I consider myself to be reasonably intelligent and to have a decent vocabulary. I've always been a reader, and so I generally do pretty well with context, even if I couldn't give you exact definitions every time. I can usually get context clues. I had to keep 3 dictionaries close at hand because it seemed like every paragraph or every other paragraph I was looking up at least one word. Usually more than that. I had to keep an OED, a Merriam-Webster's, and my writers and editors dictionary right next to me, just because I was so frequently having to use them. And it wasn't like the author's use of these more intellectual, highbrow sort of words. It's not like it enhanced what he was saying. It seemed to me like it actually impeded his ability to convey whatever he wanted to convey to the reader. I spent so much time trying to figure out what he was, what the definitions were of what he was saying, that I spent more time writing down those notes in the margins than actually sitting there and absorbing what he was saying. And even then, it seemed to me like even his message, as far as I could understand it, it seemed to be a little bit self-important. I don't know, it seemed like he was just pretentious is really the way I can best say it. I mean, I agree that a lot of Austen's action does take place in these different interactions, like card games and dances. And there were parts that I enjoyed, particularly in the play section, the chapter on play. But even then, it was getting really frustrating that I had to keep stopping, pulling myself out of the book in order to figure out exactly what he was trying to say. And it wasn't like these were technical terms, like when I read in the sciences, or when I'm reading, say, Michelle P. Brown's book on the Lindisfarne Gospels, where I expect to see some technical language there that I will have to look up things. But even with the book on the Lindisfarne Gospels, I didn't find that I had to be looking up things nearly as often as I did for this book. And this isn't rocket science. This is writing. It shouldn't be this complex. And for an author to make it this complex almost feels like he's trying to make it more difficult to understand. Or, like I said, like he's trying to seem more impressive. I can't imagine what it must have been like to try, if this man taught classes. I can't imagine sitting in one of these classes. He must have been insufferable. Because there are points where when I would be like, oh, that's kind of cool, yeah. I enjoyed the parts where he was talking about Mansfield Park and the card game, and about how the card game could parallel things coming later on. A little bit about his conversation about the Lover's Vows play. But there were points where he's talking about I don't know, I'm not sure how I felt about his comparing some of Frank Churchill's stuff to being more Gaelic, and I don't know, I guess just some of the ideas he was suggesting, I'm not sure if I completely agreed with. Now, I did pull things out of it that I am glad that I got out of this book before I stopped reading, where I thought a little bit more about, why Frank Churchill treats Jane the way he does, Jane Fairfax, and about how he almost seems to be punishing her for his need to keep their secret, almost like he's punishing her for his feeling of powerlessness, because he knows that his aunt and uncle wouldn't approve of their relationship, and it's almost like he's punishing her for that, because that feeling of not being able to pursue this relationship makes him feel somehow insecure. But that was me pulling that out of what was being written here. Although things that the author stated helped me pull that out of that. But there are points where I just couldn't go any further because it became such a chore to read. And, yeah, I only got to the second section, which was on desire, and I don't know, I just couldn't see where the author was going with it. He was, because he was so focused on this overly pretentious language, half the time I was uncertain of where he was trying to go with a certain topic. I began to catch glimmerings, and then I'd be like, okay, but where does this fall in your point that you're trying to make? It's almost like you're pulling together these random ideas, and some of them I agree with, and some of them I'm not sure about, but because sometimes you just speak in such, you write in such a incomprehensible manner that I'm not sure if I agree with you or not. So I would not recommend this book. Like I said, there were small things that I pulled out of it, but I could have equally pulled it out of just reading Austen's stuff. I mean, I'm decently happy. I'm not even decently happy. I am glad I pulled out of the book what I did, but I will not be finishing this, and I will not be recommending it. I am surprised it does have one 5-star review on it. Now, the person who did the 5-star review on Goodreads did mention they did not agree with a lot of the author's conclusions. I'm surprised that she could get any of the author's conclusions completely out of it. She must be a better, she must have a larger vocabulary than I do, or whatever. But yeah, I was very disappointed. I was expecting more. I have read science books and fairly technical history books that have been far more enjoyable than this was. Which is, like I said, a shame, because character development and the writing of character is something that very much interests me. It's partially psychology, it's partially the act of putting together a character. I know that I have Joseph Campbell's, I think it's called Hero of a Thousand Faces, that I intend to read at some point because I am interested in the writing of character and partially the psychology that goes along with that. Actually, I want to read, I think Joseph Campbell has 2 separate books that he has on writing character. I think one's on the hero's journey. So that falls right in line with what I'm interested in, which is why I am just so disappointed in the experience I've had with this book. So, yes, I wrote a very snarky review about it. I felt a lot better after doing this, but after that, not a whole lot to say. Still enjoying Mansfield Park. I'll get a little bit more reading done on that maybe tonight. I think I'm about halfway through. This is a reread for me, so I'm in no rush. I'm continuing to annotate. Now, as sort of a consolation, I started another book. Apparently, there is a site, when I was looking at some deals I was trying to get on a specific Jane Austen book, I found a site that sells, like, Jane Austen, either books about Jane Austen's writing, like people's thoughts on her writing, or about the era itself, or different editions of her books. I think it's called JaneAustenBooks.com or something like that. But I found there a book. Let me make sure I bookmarked where I'm at. Okay, good. Because I want to show the cover of this. Okay, cover. Oopsie. Cancel. So this book is called... Cover. Oh, this isn't very helpful for you seeing the cover. Anyway. What Jane Austen's characters read and why... Okay, What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why by Susan Allen Ford. And I'd show you the cover, but it's really hard to see on my Paperwhite, so I'm not going to turn this around. I am enjoying this a lot more. because it's on Kindle, I am writing some notes down as I go. I'm about 9% through. Let's see. Yeah, about 9% through, which ends up being about 25 pages in. So, the introduction, they just cover what the thesis is, which I think that this author does cover that very well. She talks about how Jane Austen's how the books that the characters Austen, I'm not saying that well, how the bookish experiences of Jane Austen's great readers, how they form our ideas of the world, help us get more involved, what they say about the characters, what they say about the author, what even they might say if the reader is really getting involved about the reader. And they talk about how the titles of books read by the characters can strengthen plot designs and thematic texture in their novels. Talking about the kind of, author creating not only the kind of world they want to, and the kind of novels they want to see, but also writing into existence the kind of readers that they want, kind of forming the reader. What I enjoyed, and this is still part of the intro, are some things that I've noticed just from doing a little bit of writing myself, nothing serious, and being around people who have written seriously. Austen, like many authors, sort of had a sense that her characters or any characters have an existence apart from her. And so she would talk about them like they were a part of everyday existence. So with her characters specifically, she might say, if someone asked her, oh, what would Miss Darcy write? She'd be like, well, I don't know. Essentially, I had to ask her, kind of thing. And I can't tell you how many times my mom and I, writing our shared story, will say, what would this character do about this? And like, well, I don't know. I have to talk to that character about that. Now, obviously, the characters aren't talking to us, but it sort of feels that way when you write. At least when you get really involved with it, it sort of feels like you have to get an idea of what the character would actually say, but you have to listen to them. It's kind of weird, but I get what the author is talking about and what Austen herself would talk about. And what I enjoyed too was something I've heard before, that she gave ideas of what would tell people, oh, this is what happened to the other Bennet sisters after the book finishes, which is kind of fun. The idea that they continued their life past the story, which of course they would. If you have these characters you're really involved with, why would their story stop when the book ends? That's merely the beginning of a different chapter of their story, even if it happens off screen. But what I found particularly fun is something that I've either seen my mom herself do or her do with another writer, or to a certain extent even have done myself, although not nearly as much because I'm not nearly as serious. But Austen would go to art galleries looking for her characters, and in a letter she reported seeing Mrs. Bingley, so Jane, at an art gallery, I guess, an art exhibit, a painting that made her think of Jane, and she said it is exactly herself, size, shaped face, features, and sweetness. And she goes on to say that this painting that made her think of Jane was in a white gown with green ornaments, convincing Austen that Jane did have a preference for green, like she always thought she would, and she expected to see, if she would see Lizzie's likeness, that she would be in yellow. which I thought was fun because it absolutely 100% sounds like something my mom would say and has in fact said. um, and I just love this little bit where she lamented not finding Lizzie's likeness at the exhibitions, but surmised, "I can only imagine that Mr. Darcy, prizes any picture of her too much to like it should be exposed to the public eye. I can imagine he would have that sort of feeling, that mixture of love, pride, and delicacy." And yeah, the characters really do take a life, at least if you've written your characters well, or if you've gotten really steeped into them, they do take on that life of themselves, which is, it is really cool seeing these little quotes from her just in the introduction alone. But then the book goes on to talk about how Austen's characters were really what people would talk about in her books. You know, it wasn't necessarily a focus on the plot itself. People would always talk about how they connected to her characters. And that's where it goes on to its thesis of reading and the characters reading. So one of the quotes that I took note of was that, okay, throughout her fiction, Austen creates characters like Mr. Collins with certain formative reading experiences that provide substance or dimension to fictional character. And these reading experiences don't necessarily take place on the page. He might reference it, but we don't necessarily see him reading said thing. But these references to characters reading supply not so much afterlife. I'm sorry, not so much afterlives as pretextual or paratextual lives of characters, lives that Jane Austen authorizes before or beside the text, but that might possibly exist beyond her control. So what I just said, that, you know, it provides depth to the character, even if it doesn't add to the plot directly, it makes that world seem rounder, make that character seem less flat, because they have other interests outside of the direct plot. The author of this book also says, readers of Pride and Prejudice reading about Fordyce's sermons and measuring their own experience of reading Fordyce against Mr. Collins or Lydia Bennet's might grant those characters a contingent reality. We all become readers together. Now, the author had started off the introduction mentioning that even the reason that this author started reading Jane Austen was because a character she connected with in a different book read Austen. So she went and looked up Jane Austen's books to share that experience with this character that she connected with. So just another, even an outside Austen, how characters reading can add dimension to their lives and connect the author, or create a connection between author, reader, and character in a deeper way. Now, the first chapter, that was all in the introduction. I'm in the first chapter, but it goes on to talk mostly about the reading, Jane Austen's personal reading, which would eventually, of course, form her writing and what her characters would read. So it talks about the circulating libraries. It talks about the book clubs, and of course books that were owned, and about the gentlemen's libraries that became popular during that time period, that if anyone had any sort of status, they would develop a library. And even if they weren't necessarily a great reader themselves, they might then lend those books out while still owning books as sort of a status symbol, kind of like we used to see in medieval times, where the illuminated manuscripts would be owned as sort of a status symbol. Now, I did think it was interesting that in this quote here on page 24, Jane Austen mentioned they were disgusted in 20 pages by Madame de Genlis's Alphonsine, maybe, or maternal affection, and so changed it for the female Quixote. The verb changed seems to proclaim that the novels come from a circulating library, as does the currency of Alphonsine. So I took from that, hey, Austen would DNF as well. So I thought that was just kind of a fun side note. But yeah, this looks like it's going to be interesting because it not only discusses a bit of Austen's connection with her characters, that very personal connection, not only with her characters, but it also mentions her connection to characters from other books. And I absolutely feel that because I do this with characters from novels, characters from comic books, where you're almost like on a first name basis with them. Like there is someone like almost like a friend. Because, if you've read books enough, especially if you're a rereader, or if it's a long series, like some of Terry Brooks's works, or if you are looking at Star Wars, something like Star Trek, if you're looking at comic books, where you're seeing characters recurring, you do feel like you know these characters and end up being on a first name, like you're on a first name basis with them. So they kind of feel like friends, even though obviously they're not real, but they have their own sort of plane of reality, which sounds wacko, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I look forward to seeing how this author continues with her thesis of characters reading in novels and how that adds to the reading experience for the person who is actually reading the book, and how that not only affects their experience but could actually affect the reader in other ways as well. At least I'm presuming that's where this author is going with that. So yeah, I'm not terribly far along, but I am enjoying this much more than I did the previous book. I am writing notes as I go, simply because I don't have the best memory, and I found with Kindle books, I don't tend to talk about them as in depth if I don't write some sort of notes. So I'm trying to write down notes that particularly grab me as I go, which makes the reading a little bit slower than it might otherwise be, but I think that I will get more out of it that way. And in comparison, let's see how far along I actually got in this one. Yeah, I am catching up a little. Let's see, I got 46 pages in from on the last book, and I'm 25 pages in on this one. I only started the Kindle book today, or either today or late last night. Can't remember which. Anyway. No, I started today. I started today because I want to say I showed this to maybe I did do it yesterday. Okay, either I did it yesterday evening or today, where I showed my mom and my dad this book, and we talked about the fact of how frustrating this was to read, and that was when I came to the decision, gave myself permission to DNF it. I'm still going to keep my annotations in there because there is some value to what I got out of it. Even a book that is incredibly annoying to read can have its benefits to it, and I don't think that removing the annotations has any purpose. But already in less than 24 hours, I've gone farther in this book than I have all month. Or I've come halfway point of where I got to. So, I got to 40-something pages in Pride of the Moment. I'm about 25 pages in this book. It took me almost a full month of July to get to where I am now in the Pride of the Moment. It took me less than 24 hours to get to 25 pages. in the Kindle book. So obviously enjoying this more, making my way through it a lot quicker. So that's all I have to say for that book review, both covering the DNF and the book that I have started. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. Are there any books that you have recently had to DNF? Are there books that you've stopped because you've gotten frustrated with the way that the author chose to formulate their sorry, my brain's foggy. Chose to formulate their thesis, how they chose to present their topic. And if there's any books that just frustrated you to that degree where you just couldn't continue just because the author failed in his job of making you understand what he was trying to say. But yeah, hope you got something out of this video. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope that you have a very blessed day. And I will see you again next time. And I think my mouse has died. Okay, there we go. See you again next time. Bye.